My daughter threw hot coffee in my face at the restaurant. I screamed for help. Skin burning and blistering. Later, her wedding venue canceled. What I did made her crawl back. The cup was bone china, and it made a small bell sound against the saucer. A tink. A fragile note that told me I should have left 5 minutes earlier. Sunlight broke through the restaurant windows like clean sheets being shaken out. Dust turning gold as it floated. The place smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread and the faint city smell that sneaks in no matter how hard a door closes. I had invited my daughter, Maya, to talk about her wedding. I had rehearsed simple father things in my mind. I'm proud of you. Your mother would have cried happy tears. Do you need help with the menu? But Maya came in with a tight mouth and her fiancé, Caleb, a step behind her, already looking at his phone. If you're hearing my voice right now, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because I'm curious how a moment like this looks in your city, on your street, at your table, when love and cruelty sit beneath the same light. Maya didn't touch the pastry. She didn't ask about my cheek where age spots have begun to map a life. She said, "We need the lake cabin in our name before the wedding." Caleb's parents insist. "It's optics." She said optics the way someone says oxygen, like it's natural. I watched the slow stir of steam from her cup and felt a shift in my chest that wasn't fear and wasn't anger. Something colder. "That cabin is your mother's ashes and music," I said. "Not optics." Her eyes snapped to mine, and I saw a stranger who wore my daughter's face. I have known heat all my life, the kind from an engine, from a stovetop, from the hand of a child who runs too fast and scrapes her knee and thinks the world is over. I did not know the heat of fresh coffee thrown by a person I raised until that second. The cup tipped. The world tilted with it. The coffee hit my cheek and eye, and I heard myself make a sound I didn't recognize. I screamed for help without pride or dignity because pain is honest. The smell turned from cinnamon to scorched sugar and bitterness, the whole room leaning away from me. Chairs scraped. Someone gasped. A server yelled for ice. I saw Caleb's hand lift to protect his cuff, just his cuff, a white line of cloth against a black jacket, and then I saw the manager's face appear and vanish and appear again, as if the whole building was blinking. I don't remember reaching for the napkin because my skin was screaming. First hot, then hotter, then a kind of white noise that made the edges of the room go soft. I remember the floor felt solid under my shoes, and I kept my balance because I learned long ago not to fall when other people want to see you fall. Hands came into my vision, bringing ice wrapped in towels, then a bowl of water, then a soft voice asking me to sit, to breathe, to let them help. I blinked water out of my remaining good eye and saw the paramedics arrive, their uniforms like armor for a world that keeps breaking. "Sir, do you want to press charges?" One of them asked while the other looked at my skin, gently, throwing the light away with the tilt of her hands. I saw my daughter in the doorway. Her chest moved fast. Her face did not. She held her phone like a weapon and stared at me like I was a small problem in a day of bigger problems. "Not today," I said, the words flat and heavy, my voice even, too even. The paramedic looked at me as if to say later you might feel different, but I was already somewhere else. As the ambulance doors shut, after the air changed from restaurant smells to disinfectant and metal and rubber, my left hand found the brass key in my jacket pocket. It was cold and familiar. The way familiar things are when you forget them for a while and they wait without complaint. I moved my thumb along its edge once, twice, and slipped it back into my pocket. I watched the city through the back window, upside down and safer that way. The hospital light is a cruel kind of honest. It does not flatter. It tells you your edges and your age and the exact color of your hurt. A nurse with warm eyes and clean hands washed my face in a slow circle that made me think of other circles. The lid on a paint can. The smoke ring my father could make when he still smoked by the porch. The way my wife, Lena, used to stir sauce as if it were the only thing that mattered in the world at that moment. I let the nurse work. I thanked her. Then I closed my eyes and let the sound of the fluorescent hum pull me back to a kitchen where steam meant dinner, not damage. In that kitchen, the table was nicked oak, honest wood that carried the scars of math homework and spilled salt, and one small burn from when a candle fell at a birthday so bright we forgot the flame. In that kitchen, Lena leaned over our daughter, Maya, who stood on a chair to reach the counter, 6 years old and showing off a gap in her teeth when she laughed. "We stir gently," Lena whispered into Maya's ear. "We don't spill heat. We invite it to cool." The spoon chimed against the side of the mug and the sound was a bell for home, for safe. Cinnamon dusted Maya's nose. She sneezed and laughed and looked at me like I hung the moon. There was a time when my whole heart lived in that tiny glance. At the lake cabin, which isn't a cabin so much as a small honest house that knows it's not a palace, Maya chased dragonflies almost lazily because the air near the water makes even children slow down. Lena's blue shawl caught the breeze and made the light around her softer. A violin leaned in the corner, varnish smelling like honey, strings waiting for a hand to teach them how to sing. That room smelled like pine, and the way time slows when you're right where you're supposed to be. Years later in a hospital, the antiseptic fought those smells and couldn't win. I remembered selling my guitar when the company laid off my shift and then picking up a third job so Maya could have the dress she wanted for her recital. I remembered taking my lunch break in the car so I could nap instead of eat, because overtime doesn't care for fathers. I remembered Lena's last breath in my palm like a secret she was giving me because she trusted me to keep it. I made a promise to her in that breath. Keep her safe, keep her kind. It's a complicated promise. Because safety isn't always soft and kindness isn't always letting people get what they want. When I got home with my cheek wrapped in a clean bandage and a little white bag of ointment and gauze in my hand, I found the world had moved without me. A courier had wedged an arrangement of white lilies by the door, their scent like a funeral I didn't want yet. The card said, "Heal quickly so we can talk like adults." Emma's no apology, no warmth. The lilies looked at me with their blank faces and I put them outside where they belonged. A second envelope sat beneath the lilies. The paper was thick, the kind you save for people you want to impress. It was the wedding seating chart. I found my name. Table 23. Near the service door where the servers cut through with trays and where the cold air from the back slips into the expensive room in thin, disrespected drafts. No speech, no father-daughter dance. A note signed by Caleb's mother, Lorraine, in a neat, sharp hand. "We want to avoid making anyone uncomfortable." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the line was so careful. Or cowardly. Another package waited behind that one, and it was heavier. It was a deed transfer. A draft. For convenience. Caleb had written in a text that followed it by 10 minutes, like he knew I would open my mail right away like a man who lives alone does. "Let's put the lake cabin in the new family entity so the press sees stability. Signed before Friday. We need leverage with vendors." Leverage. I pictured my daughter at 6. I put down the pen and put my hand in my pocket and felt the brass key and my pulse slowed the way mountains slow rivers. "Not today, Caleb," I texted back. 2 words. No exclamation points. No explanation. I put the transfer in a drawer with the manuals for appliances I actually use when things break. They came to the house as if it were theirs already. Lorraine wore a perfume that smelled like lilacs and money, and the idea that other people are there to be arranged. She had a smile that showed no teeth and made no promises. Caleb walked my hallway with his phone in his hand like a compass that points to wherever his wishes wait. Maya moved as if showing a property to buyers with a time constraint, touching things with her eyes, not her hands. She stopped at Lena's violin, which sleeps in a black case that still carries the shape of the person who held it most. "We'll store the old things," Maya said without looking at me, as if my history is a box she can label with a Sharpie and stack in a climate-controlled unit. Caleb added, "You can keep a room at the cabin, of course. We're not monsters." There was a time when those last 4 words would have made me angry enough to say things I'd regret. I have learned that quiet cuts deeper. "If you sell your memory," I said in a flat voice, "make sure the price is worth the ghost that comes with it." Lorraine laughed the way people laugh when they don't hear the words, just the tone. She reached for the violin case. I lifted it a few inches out of reach and set it back down. "Not today," I said again, and my voice was the sound of a door closing gently with a bolt behind it. They looked at each other. Lorraine's mouth pinched. Caleb put a hand on Maya's back. "You're complicating things, Dad," he said. The word dad from his mouth sounded like a borrowed coat. I made tea I didn't drink after they left and sat with it cooling on the counter until it matched the room. I have a yellow legal pad for when my head needs straight lines. I took it out and drew 3 columns. What they think I own, what I actually own, what I've never told them. It's a simple exercise and it always calms me because it is a reminder that other people's maps are not the territory. In the first column, I wrote the obvious. The house, the cabin, the little boat that leaks a bit on the left side unless you sit just so. In the second, I wrote the shares and the little pockets of land that you only notice if you know where to stand to see them. In the third, I wrote Arbor Trust. I printed the letters slowly, filling the lines. Arbor Trust is not a complicated thing. It is a basket with a lock, something Lena and I built when she got sick and the world started handling us more roughly than it had before. We put the cabin in it and some land and some investments that never did what we wanted quickly, but always did it eventually. We built it so Maya could grow up without a target on her back. We built it so we could say yes to what mattered and no to what did not, even when our hands shook. I added another line in that third column, Willow House at Stonebridge. The wedding venue they chose, a pretty place with glass walls and ivy vines curling like cursive over old brick, and a lawn that photographs well after rain. I know its bones in a way their website does not. It stands on land that Arbor Trust holds more than a hand in. I wrote the word lease rider and then the words termination clause, and then I stopped and put down the pen and let my breath even. Plans like to be made inside even breaths. The next morning I went to the bank and said hello to a woman I have known longer than my knees have hurt. She gave me a small nod that said she saw my bandage and respected my silence. I signed the card that says a box is mine and not mine. The brass key turned with a sound like a clock agreeing. That little friendly click. The safe deposit box slid out of a wall that holds more secrets than a family reunion, and I set it on a narrow table covered in green felt that always smells like old paper and dusting powder. Inside the box I kept what I call my quiet things. A red envelope, a blue folder, a thin white envelope with my wife's handwriting on it, each letter of my name with a flourish at the end because she believed even names should have music. I did not open the thin envelope first because I knew if I did, the other two might sit unopened for another year. Instead, I slid out the blue folder. It held the trust documents, the signatures that turn heir into ownership, the diagrams of how people we love are protected from people who say they love us. I set the blue folder aside. Then I picked up the red envelope. It was the master lease addendum, the rider that rides above the website's promises and the glossy brochures and the smiling brides under vines. The land under Willow House belongs mostly to Arbor Trust, and if I believe something will harm the brand or the people or the place, I may suspend operations at my discretion with notice. Clause 14 is short and very clear. I placed the red envelope on the counter in front of me, then touched the white envelope with Lena's handwriting as if it might purr under my fingers. I was not ready to open it. I was not. I blew out a breath and thought of her shawl. I slit the top with the little silver cutter the bank keeps on a string. Inside were 5 lines in a hand I could have recognized by the dark on a cloudy night. If she forgets, don't let her be crushed by the remembering. You are allowed to be strong. Choose quiet strength. Choose the long road. The letter ended there. I let the paper rest on the green felt and put my palm on it for a second, like blessing something before you put it back in its place. The words steadied my hand. A plan is a steady hand you make out of thin air and intention. I called Victor Chen on my way home. He is a friend, born of kitchens and bills and the long survival that happens under fluorescent lights. His catering company has fed more people in this city than most churches. He has a laugh that likes to come out even when he is sad. He picked up on the first ring. I heard about the coffee, he said. You okay? I said I was healing and that I needed to see the calendar. He made a sound that people make when they don't ask why because they know you'll tell them if you need to. I went to his office where the air smelled like soy and garlic and printer ink and fryer oil that's been used by someone who respects it. He slid me a calendar without a word. Willow House, Stonebridge, the 9th of next month. 200 guests. Premium bar. Custom menu with 3 stations, coastal, farm, suite. I did the math in my head on the fly. The way I used to do when I knew exactly how much bread cost, exactly how much gas, exactly how much a broken bone could ruin. I wrote a number on the corner of a notepad. Victor whistled under his breath. You sure? He said. I am, I said, and maybe he saw it in my face, the thing that wasn't anger that had moved in and sat on my couch like it belonged there. He nodded. Say when. I drove past Willow House on the way back. It was late afternoon. The light soft and thin like it is right before evening shows you what it can do. Vines crawled up brick, writing old stories in green. A delivery truck idled. Exhaust met cut grass and made a smell that reminded me of football season. The manager stepped outside to smoke. He flicked his lighter twice before it caught. He didn't recognize me. That was good. I drove home slowly. as if the road might change under my tires and I wanted to be ready. I set my phone alarm for the night of the rehearsal. I polished the violin case. I folded Lena's blue shawl. I stood in the doorway of the room where Lena used to tune her violin and close her eyes and not move until a note in her head matched a note in the air. I said her name out loud so the house would know I remembered who built this life with me. When the night came, I drove to Willow House early, because early is what you do when you want to see the shape of things before other people put their fingerprints on them. The parking lot smelled like recent rain. The band warmed up and one wrong note slipped through and made everything else sound better by contrast. My cheek itched under the healing skin. A small boy in a little suit ran after his mother and tripped, and the sound of his body hitting grass reminded me that almost all falls are survivable when the ground is soft. I walked up the steps holding the shawl and the case. The glass doors held my face and returned it to me with the odd stretch that curved glass gives. Inside, laughter and clinking and music. Polished people in polished shoes. Maya saw me across the room and her mouth tightened into a line it didn't know how to hold for long. Caleb came toward me with his tie loosened and a smile that did not climb into his eyes. Lorraine floated in his wake. "We asked for space," Caleb said. "You were asked not to come for rehearsal." Lorraine put a hand on his arm. Her perfume went first because it always did. "We'll avoid a scene, Mr. Halden," she said, voice smooth. I held out the shawl. "Your mother wore this when she married me," I said quietly. "I would like you to have it. And the violin, if you want to dance to something that means something." Maya glanced at Lorraine, the smallest shake of her head. No more movement than a leaf saying no to wind. "We have a new aesthetic," Maya said. "We don't need relics." I nodded as if I had expected that, and in some way I had. "Suit yourself," I said. I set the violin case gently at the edge of the steps, where it would not be stepped on but would be seen by anyone who looked where they walked. I didn't ask again. I turned and walked down the stairs, my chest full of weight but my steps steady. Lorraine's voice came from behind me. "Are you going to make a scene?" she called, and laughter followed the words like little birds that fly after a big bird because they think it's safer that way. I did not answer. My phone buzzed. My alarm as calm as a metronome. I called Victor. "It's time," I said. The evening air cooled a degree, as if the world had been waiting for someone to touch the thermostat. I stood by the hydrangeas and dialed again. The property manager answered. I could hear the party through his door, a thin, excited sound. "It's Halden," I said. "We need to talk." The office smelled like old wine and printed paper and something sweet left open too long. The manager closed the door and stood behind his desk like it was a barrier he believed in. He was younger than me by 20 years and older than me in the way of men who think their names are their title. "We're very busy tonight," he said. "So am I replied, and I laid the red envelope on his desk. He reached for it like he wanted to make it neat with the other papers. He lifted the flap and read. He read again. His thumb left a small print on the edge of the paper. "Arbor Trust," he said out loud. Because saying words sometimes makes them wear different clothes. His eyes lifted to mine. "That's..." "For purposes of this conversation," I said, and my voice was calm as a lake with ice just forming. "Yes." I pulled from my jacket the photographs of my face without the bandage, the incident report from the restaurant manager, a printout of the text where Caleb asked me to transfer the cabin for optics and leverage, the seating chart that tried to move me by a door. I aligned them without smacking them down because power does not need to make a scene. Clause 14, I said. Brand risk and safety concerns. Termination at landlord discretion with notice. The notice is now. He parted his lips and then closed them. He adjusted his tie because men like him adjust their tie when they need to touch something to ground themselves. "This is very unusual," he said, trying to make the words slow down the moment. "Not today," I said with a smile that wasn't warmth. "Today the unusual thing is your compliance." That word seemed to help him. He liked manuals and compliance and clocks that run as advertised. He picked up the phone and called the front. He said the code they use when something changes that isn't supposed to. The room held very still around his voice, like rooms do when a decision sits in the middle and everyone knows not to bump it. The printer on the credenza behind him woke and coughed and pulled in paper and spat out a letter with ink that still glistened. He slid it toward me. I initialed the margin. "Refund their deposit in full," I said. "I'll eat the cost because I don't want you dragged for this. Keep my name off the record. Landlord discretion is a strong umbrella. Use it." If they threaten, you tell them to call me. I'll hold the weather." He nodded. "Yes, sir," he said. The sir was unnecessary, but it was also an acknowledgement that people like to give when the game shifts and they realize they are not playing where they thought they were. I took one copy. I left one copy. I stepped out into a hallway that smelled like hydrangeas and panic. The emails landed during rehearsal cake cutting. The pianist's hands hesitated and the room sounded a small stutter. The music didn't stop because music rarely does, but it pretended to tie its shoe. My phone lit up with my daughter's name and I let it ring once long before I put it to my ear. "What did you do?" she cried without hello, and her voice broke in 3 places. "I protected my property," I said. "And your mother's memory. Both are mine to guard." "They're canceling us," she said. Her breath came like she'd been running. "Dad, they can't just—" "They can," I said gently. "They did. They will again if you let people turn your life into optics." Caleb grabbed the phone. I could hear the friction of the hand on the case. "You're finished," he said. The hiss he uses when he thinks whispering is power. "Will Sue. We'll make sure everyone knows you're—" "Check your inbox from Shoreline Capital," I said, not loudly. The silence that followed had weight. He checked. I could hear his thumb move like a small animal in dry leaves. "Your bridge financing?" I said mildly. "Arbor Trust holds the note. We're pausing disbursements pending conduct review." He breathed in and forgot to breathe out for a second. "Payroll is Friday," he said, his voice smaller and truer. "Then fix yourselves by Thursday," I replied. "Apologize. Make it real. I'm not your enemy unless you insist I be." Lorraine's voice barked in the background, full of words like lawyer and mistake and consequences, and the sound of her is the sound of fingernails clicking on a glass, sharp and pointless. "Try me," I said. "Discovery is a light. You don't like light?" I hung up because sometimes the firmest no is a click. I called the restaurant manager where the coffee happened and asked if my daughter could apologize in person to the staff without cameras and captions and the tiny lies people tell on videos. He hesitated because he is a kind man in a hard job. And then he said, "We'll see." I wrote an email to the police officer who took my report and I asked to place a statement that I was seeking a restorative path if my daughter acknowledged what she did in a way that sank into her bones. "I am not dismissing it," I wrote. "I am calling it what it is and asking for accountability that doesn't only feed lawyers." I sat in my kitchen with the violin case open. The wood glowed. I ran my fingers along the edge where the varnish is worn from years of hands. My phone kept ringing. I let it, not out of spite, out of choosing. Morning came on the lake like it always does, a gray light that softens everything, a quiet that belongs to birds, fog rising low as if the water were thinking out loud. A car door shut, footsteps on my deck. I did not turn until I had finished the sip of coffee that I made myself, and that would not hurt me. "Dad?" Maya's voice was smaller than it had been in years. It came from the place she used when she asked me to fix the chain on her bike. I turned. She stood on the deck with Lena's blue shawl wrapped around her shoulders. It made the skin of her face look a little warmer. She held the violin case the careful way people hold heavy secrets. Her eyes were swollen in the way that comes from crying alone and then deciding to keep crying in front of someone who matters. "I was wrong," she said. The words were slow, the way the best words are when they need to be. "I hurt you. I hurt people. I don't know why I did that." Silence stretched between us like a piece of thread held by 2 hands. It didn't break. I waited. She looked at the lake and then back at me. "Lorraine says we can sue," she said, and then she shook her head as if correcting herself. "I don't want to be that person. You weren't once," I said. "You can choose again." She sat. The shawl fell a little and I fixed it the way I used to fix her scarf before school. She cried in that quiet way that mothers recognize and fathers hear and wish they didn't. "I wanted things to look perfect," she said. "I wanted to prove something to people who don't care about us. I thought if I had everything in order, I'd feel like I wasn't missing something." "What are you missing?" I asked. "Her," she said. "Mom and you. I left you in the waiting room of my life. I'm sorry." Sorry is a small word for a big thing, but sometimes it is the right tool if you use it well. That afternoon, we drove to the restaurant. We didn't talk much. The manager met us at the door. He looked at her and then at me. He moved aside and let us in. The server who had run for ice stood behind the bar like a soldier returning to the site of a battle. Maya stood straight. She spoke without wobble. "I am sorry," she said. I assaulted a person I love in your establishment. I hurt your staff. I made you part of something ugly. I'm ashamed." The manager nodded. He didn't offer a speech. He accepted, because that's what grown people do when someone comes to them upright and without excuses. He asked if she was getting help. She said yes. She looked at me as she said it, and I nodded back because the plan had already made its shape on my legal pad. I made a list of terms not because I wanted to control her life, but because boundaries are love with a spine. Therapy for anger and stress, not once, not just to check a box, but long enough to do the work. An apology letter to the restaurant staff and any vendors who were dragged by this mess. A prenup that protected her and protected Lena's heirlooms from anyone who saw them as leverage. No cabin transfer. A postponement of the wedding until she could stand without someone else's script in her mouth. And one more thing I wanted to say out loud to make it real. Me walking you down the aisle, I said. Not as a prop, not for optics, but as your father. Or not at all. She breathed in like I had given her back some room in her lungs. I want you, she said. As my father. Not as a sponsor or an obstacle or an asset. We sat at my kitchen table. We signed what needed signing. I sent the paperwork to my attorney, who knows how to be swift when swiftness protects. I emailed Shoreline Capital to resume Caleb's funding on a probation that taught him things no boardroom had. Conditions. Conduct. A cooling off period that wasn't for his temper but for his idea of what he is allowed to do with other people's lives. I did not call Willow House not yet. It is a strange sentence, the words not yet, because it looks like delay, but is often just choosing the right time to be kind in a way that does not protect people from their own learning. Will you uncancel the venue? Maya asked that evening, sitting with her knees curled under her on my couch, the way she used to when her legs were shorter and her feet still believed in cushions. No, I said, but I will offer you something better when you're ready. She nodded. She didn't press. Sometimes change is a room where pressing breaks the furniture. For a week there were small things that were actually large. She texted the manager at the restaurant every day with an update he didn't require but appreciated. She put the shawl on in the mornings and took it off at night, and folded it the way I showed her so that the fabric wouldn't stress at the shoulders. She took the violin out and didn't play. She let it lean against the chair the way her mother used to while she made tea. Tea. She sent an email to Lorraine and Caleb and said the wedding was postponed. Not canceled, postponed. She didn't say for mental health or out of abundance of caution. She said, because the way we were doing it was wrong. Lorraine sent back a list of reasons why that was inconvenient. Caleb called and tried to make his voice soft and failed. Failed. We'll figure it out, Maya said to him with a firmness that grew in the space where your stomach tightens when you want to be brave. She didn't look at me while she said it, and that made me proud. I took her to the cabin on a morning when the lake was smooth as a thought you hadn't accidentally said out loud yet. The dock creaked the way old wood says good morning. I stood behind her and put Lena's shawl on her properly. Wide at the back, the ends crossed in front, not too tight at the shoulders. I handed her the violin. Bow straight, I said, a line I borrowed from the version of myself who used to stand behind Lena and watch her teach without crowding the room. Let your arm be the metronome. Let your wrist be soft so the string can forgive you when you learn. She drew the bow across the strings and made a sound that wasn't pretty yet and wasn't ugly. She smiled a crooked smile that was all her own and some of her mother's. I remember, she whispered. Good, I said. Now don't forget. We made a small circle of chairs by the water, 20 at most, and I called Victor and asked him to feed fewer people far better than any of us could deserve. He laughed like the man I met when we both were broke and still generous, and said, I'll bring the good plates. We picked a date months away, not so far that courage had time to curdle into excuses, not so soon that we would pretend the wound was closed before the stitches set. The light on the water made small steps toward us like a careful friend. We sat and looked and didn't fill the air with explanations. There was a day when Caleb came to the cabin and stood on the path like a traveler, deciding if a door opens toward him or away. He wore modest clothes for once, and his hair didn't look like it expected applause. He said he was sorry. He said he had learned. He said words that felt practiced and some that were raw. He said he was in therapy, and I believed him because his posture had changed in a way people can't fake. He asked if he could speak to Maya without me. I nodded and sat inside where the walls know me. I listened by not listening, the way you do when a conversation belongs to other people but your heart sits in the middle of the table. After an hour, she came in. "We're going to try again," she said, and I saw in her face not a surrender but a choice. "On my terms." "On yours," I said. She leaned her head on my shoulder and stayed there long enough for my whole body to remember weight as comfort. We walked outside together, and the three of us stood near the water and talked about small things, because small things are the ones that build the big things. He asked about the boat. I told him about the leak on the left side and how you have to sit this way. He laughed. "I can do that," he said, and his voice didn't try to buy anything. In the weeks that followed, people adjusted around us the way crowds adjust around a short man who knows where he's going. Lorraine sent a letter printed on the kind of paper that believes it has authority. She softened her edges a little. She asked to be included in planning without insisting. I said yes to some of it and no to the parts that felt like a hand in a pocket. She surprised me by accepting the no. Maybe she also had learned that optics are not oxygen. Caleb's bridge financing resumed with a list of conditions that made his board wince and nod at the same time. He met them slowly, less with performance and more with persistence. He told his investors about the pause and didn't blame it on me in a way that made him clean inside. His father called and asked to meet. I said no, not yet. Some people need to live in the house they built long enough to notice the draft before you offer them insulation. The invitation to the small wedding went out to 20 people. Some said they had prior commitments. I didn't mind. I have learned to measure days by what stays and not by what leaves. The day of the small wedding came in on the lake on the kind of breeze that makes flags want to whisper instead of shout. The chairs were simple, wood polished by hands, not machines. Victor set up 3 burners and a station that looked like it might sing. He brought bread that sighed when you pressed it, and olives that reminded me of summer in a place I have never been, and a small roast that waited its turn quietly and then made the table smell like home. I wore the suit that fits me like I am still the man Lena saw when she said yes. Maya wore a dress that did not belong to a magazine. It belonged to her. The shawl lay over her shoulders and did the work it was made to do. She took my arm. The path from the house to the water is not straight. It curves because the land was there before us. We walked it without trying to fix it. The vows were not long because they didn't need to be. He promised to stand where he is needed, not in front, not behind, but beside. She promised to speak when silence would hide hurt and to be silent when words would be about winning, not truth. I stood with them and said nothing because my part was the walking and the learning and the quiet. After she played one song on the violin, just one, a simple thing that Lena wrote for when the house was happy. The notes weren't perfect. They were true. People ate. People laughed, real laughs, the kind that bend a body. The sun moved across the water like someone being careful with their drink. I sat on the dock after the last dish was washed, and the folding chairs leaned against the wall like tired dancers. The sky reflected in the water the way joy reflects in a face that doesn't know it's being watched. My phone lit up with a text from Maya. "Thank you, Dad." I typed back, "Make your own coffee next time. Sip it." She sent a smile and a tear and a little heart because we live in a world where even big feelings get tiny pictures to help them along. I put Lena's letter back in the safe. The brass key was warm from my hand. When the box closed, it clicked like a period at the end of a sentence I had been writing for years. I thought of the first day at the restaurant. I thought of the smell of scorched sugar and the way pain demands a witness. I thought of saying not today in a voice that surprised me because it sounded like my father's when he said no to a foreman who thought he owned men. I thought of how easy it is to turn love into leverage and leverage into loss. Families don't burn you and call it love. Families don't take what's yours and tell you you're not welcome. Families don't demand your silence while they spend your name. Real family says, stand up, say sorry, then come home. Real family says, be strong, be quiet when quiet cuts deeper, and loud when loud protects someone smaller than you. Real family learns how to stir gently. Real family invites heat to cool. If you've stayed with me this far, tell me where you're watching from. Because every town has its willow house, and every lake has its fog, and every family has its tests. And I want to know what your light looks like when it comes back after a hard day. Like this, if it moved you, share it with someone who needs a quiet kind of courage today. Comment with your thoughts and where you're watching from. And subscribe for more stories that start with fire and end with water.